The air above New York City on January 15, 2009, was a deceptive canvas of crystalline blue. It promised clarity, normalcy, the predictable rhythm of a Thursday afternoon. But beneath that sky, something silent and terrible was waiting to unfold. A scenario so improbable, it belonged only in the shadowed corners of a nightmare. This is not a tale of machines or mechanics alone. It is a story about the precise moment when the predictable world shatters, and the thin veneer of human control dissolves into chaos. At Gate B32 of LaGuardia Airport, US Airways Flight 1549 stood ready. Captain Chesley Sully Sullenberger, a man whose career was measured in decades and safe landings, was in command. He was the epitome of calm competence. Beside him, First Officer Jeffrey Skiles. 150 passengers boarded, each carrying the trivial weight of their ordinary days, oblivious that they were about to participate in a violent, high-stakes collision with fate. The takeoff was routine. At 3:25 p.m., the Airbus A320 lifted off the runway, roaring into the winter air, heading south. For 100 seconds, everything was perfect. The ascent was steady. Then, at 2,800 feet, the perfection ended. The change was not gradual. It was instant, brutal, and deafening. It began with a sickening series of impacts, not external bumps, but deep, resonating shocks that ran through the very bones of the aircraft. Imagine the sound of heavy hail mixed with the wet, tearing noise of organic matter destroying high-speed turbines. A dark avian storm, a flock of Canada geese, had collided with the plane's heart. Inside the cockpit, the world warped. The roar of the engines, that comforting, powerful hum that signifies safety, vanished. It was replaced by an unnatural silence, punctuated only by a rapid, guttural shuddering. The plane had suffered a double-engine failure. Both General Electric engines were silent. Dead. Sully looked out. Smoke, or perhaps steam, billowed from the nacelles. The instruments confirmed the impossible. Zero thrust. They were, in effect, in a giant 70-ton glider, falling toward the densely populated steel landscape of Manhattan. This was the true beginning of the horror. It was the moment of realization that the established rules of physics and safety no longer applied. They had 208 seconds left before impact, 208 seconds to solve an unsolvable equation. Below them, the options appeared and vanished like mirages. LaGuardia was too far. The turn radius was too tight. Teterboro Airport in New Jersey, a desperate gamble, meant flying low over buildings and risking a catastrophic crash into residential areas, sacrificing hundreds on the ground to save the 155 in the air. Sully, his voice calm yet weighted with the gravity of the inevitable, contacted air traffic control. The communication was sparse, chillingly direct. "We hit birds. We lost thrust in both engines. We are turning back towards LaGuardia." A pause, laden with the physics of a rapidly descending object. "We can't do it. We are going to be in the Hudson." The Hudson. The frigid, indifferent gray river that separated Manhattan from New Jersey. It was not a runway. It was a watery grave, an expanse of 40-degree fluid waiting to devour the plane whole. Yet, in that single decisive moment, the Hudson ceased to be a geographical boundary and became the only viable pathway out of the abyss. The pressure inside the cabin was immense, invisible. The passengers, recognizing the profound quiet and the dramatic shift in altitude, exchanged terrified glances. The flight attendants began their rehearsed, yet now terrifyingly real, bracing instructions. Brace for impact. Brace. This descent was guided by a terrifying calculus. Sully had to maintain enough speed to control the plane, but not so much that the impact with the water would tear the fuselage apart. He was aiming for a perfect, impossibly level splashdown, slowing the rate of descent to mere feet per minute, not miles per hour. He brought the aircraft down the corridor of the river between the skyscrapers, a ghostly figure cutting through the skyline. The water below looked flat, innocent, but it was a concrete wall at 150 miles per hour. At 3:31 p.m., 3.5 minutes after the strike, the impossible occurred. The impact was not a gentle glide. It was a violent, earth-shaking deceleration. A colossal spray of water erupted, momentarily blinding the world. The force of the landing ripped panels off the underside of the wings. The river clawed at the fuselage, trying to pull the plane down instantly. The sudden cold was the first real monster to emerge. Water, mercilessly cold, immediately began surging into the cabin through cracks and ruptured seals. In the chaos, the crew moved with an almost mechanical precision. The flight attendants, standing in waist-deep water within minutes, shouted instructions to evacuate onto the wings and the emergency slides that quickly became temporary rafts. The horror now transitioned from the aerial impossibility to the struggle against the elements. People scrambled out onto the wings, the wind biting them, the cold stealing their breath. They looked like ants clinging to a sinking lifeboat. Within minutes, ferries and water taxis, themselves part of the Hudson's daily routine, converged on the scene. They were the unplanned cavalry, responding to the surreal sight of an airliner floating precariously in the middle of the river. 155 lives were saved. Every single person aboard Flight 1549 walked away, shaken, soaked, but alive. The world called it the miracle on the Hudson. But miracles, especially those involving complex machinery, always invite scrutiny. The true, unsettling climax of this story came not in the splashdown, but in the subsequent investigation by the NTSB. The focus was simple. Did Sully really have no alternative? Could he have saved the plane by making it back to an airport? The investigators, employing sophisticated simulators, repeatedly attempted to replicate the scenario. In every initial simulation, pilots were told immediately after the strike that they had lost thrust, and they were guided back towards LaGuardia or Teterboro. And in every single simulation, the plane crashed violently, failing to reach the runway. The results were damning at first, suggesting human error. But Sully insisted on one critical detail. The simulations failed to account for the crucial delay. The agonizing, terrifying seconds it took a pilot to realize the extent of the disaster, process the failure, and commit to a solution. The time spent in that pit of shock and dread. When the NTSB finally adjusted the simulation, introducing a 35-second delay to account for the human factor, the blink of panic, the hesitation of disbelief, the results were conclusive. When replicating the real-world conditions, none of the simulated pilots could return to the airport. Every plane crashed into the densely populated areas. The conclusion was stark. The Hudson River landing was not merely the best option. It was the only option. It was the single, precise choice that prevented a catastrophe of unimaginable scale. Sully's skill lay not just in his decades of experience, but in his capacity to remain the master of his domain, even as fate ripped that domain apart. In those 208 critical seconds, Captain Sullenberger stared into the absolute horror of inevitable failure and found a narrow, terrifying path to survival. He did not defeat the birds or the physics. He defeated the clock, proving that sometimes the most heroic action is choosing the cold, hard certainty of a gamble over the soft comfort of a known impossibility. The miracle was not that the plane stayed afloat, but that the pilot dared to trust the terrifying water over the unforgiving land.